It says you are live. This is the LinkedIn Live event that's about to change your just be yourself advice into your be your best self guidance. And I'm Laura Bergels. I'm a LinkedIn learning instructor. I teach courses on business communication, as does my colleague who is with me here today. His name is Todd DeWitt. Do it, Todd, do it. And I see balloons coming up. Did you do that, Todd?
I did not. I have no idea why that just happened, but it was funny.
I didn't do it. Did somebody in the comments do it? You might be expecting Izzy here today, the Izzy fans. And if you notice, Todd isn't Izzy. Izzy is out sick today. And Todd was really gracious to come in and pinch hit for Izzy. Todd has a lot of things to say because he is the business communication coach who has worked for a lot of years as well in this field, a trainer. He has written the book Dancing with Monsters about leadership, a nice allegorical tale, and you can even see it in the background there. So if you can hear me right now, please send some love and support to Izzy and say, get well soon, Izzy, in the comments. And we'll get going about what started this whole live stream on the topic of just be yourself and why it's such bad advice. Todd and I both have a lot of things to say about that. And what prompted this is I wrote a newsletter or an article on LinkedIn Learning or LinkedIn and talked about how I have clients, a lot of young students too, who are flipped out and freaked out when people will give them that advice of, you know what, just be yourself, just act natural, you'll do fine. Because your identity isn't as simple as just do anything. It's not that simple. It's not that easy. And it makes matters worse sometimes when people are struggling with their identity to say, just be yourself. And they're like, who am I? So you're about to hop on stage and now you've got another existential crisis going on about who you are on top of just be yourself. Kathy's here to say, get well soon, Izzy. Sorry to miss you today. Yeah, me too. Izzy's a great guy. And Ariel, balloons may have happened as a result of Todd's peace sign if you're using Teams. I didn't know that. So if we do this, do we get? Oh my God! Yeah. I didn't know that.
Thank you. That's amazing. Now we were learning. Okay.
Thank you for teaching us something new. Listen, if nothing else happens today, we have learned something valuable from Ariel. Thank you, Ariel, so much. We appreciate you.
That's funny.
Well, Todd, you read my newsletter article on just be yourself. And what is your take on the subject?
Well, as much as we're going to make fun of people who say it, first I'm going to let them off the hook a little bit. It comes from a good place. They're trying to be helpful. They're trying to say you're a great person. You're going to be fine. But the truth is, and by the way, if you don't know me, I've been talking about authenticity, among other things, for a lot of years. And nonetheless, when I put on my Let's Help People Communicate hat, which I did as a professor and still do as an independent expert, so to speak, well, it's not about authenticity as much as it is a few other things, because no one, this is where I would start, Laura, no one goes into a social setting, especially in professional life, and instantly feels completely comfortable and willing and able to be as they would with their best friend over coffee. That's not how humans work. We have all kinds of weird things that happen to keep us safe, that we think about, that we feel when we get into social situations with others. We want to meet their expectations. We're worried about being judged, and 25 other things. Saying to someone, just be yourself, comes from a good place and is almost worthless as advice. So let me, with that intro, turn to you and say, okay, what's better than telling them just to be themselves?
One of the things that I like to say is let's work on being your best self and presenting your best self in any circumstance you find yourself in. And I will actually look back to works like from Charles Cooley, the sociologist, who basically said what you just said about the looking glass self, is that we are in large part who we think others think we are. So that's quite the tangle now, isn't it? So how do you go about doing something like that? And in the worlds of theater, and my background is in theater, and I use a lot of theater techniques in my public speaking course, we have a phrase called just throw it all away or throw it all away. And what that means is after you've worked on your breath work, your body work, your improvisational skills, your messaging, perhaps you've memorized a script, perhaps you haven't. But there comes a point where you've done all that technical work, you've worked on your skill set, and now you need to be on stage. And that's where, as a coach, you say, now throw it all away. Throw it all away. That way you can just trust yourself, be in the moment, be there for your audience, be there completely and fully. And I love that because the root word of presentation is present. You are being present for your audience when you throw it all away. But before you can just be yourself and throw it all away, there's a heck of a lot of prep work that goes into that, isn't there, Todd?
I mean, that's exactly what I'm listening to you. And I'm like, man, I love that. But wait a minute, how many people can go achieve that at the drop of a dime? And the truth is, of course, it's a process and a journey, and you've got to figure out what it means for you as an individual. Every path is different to gain that level of being present, being comfortable in the moment. And even then, you're not 100% authentic. You're still, if you're smart, relying on that prep work to get that message right. It starts with understanding your audience, understanding the room, and and prepping based on those. Let's back up because you're reacting. I love that. Let's back up. What does it mean to prepare? And I know I want to say this before anybody tells me, look, I don't have all the time in the world, sir, to prepare for everything. Well, what I say to that when people go, I'm busy, is I say 80-20 everything, the whole Pareto principle. Okay, so there's probably 20% of the communication episodes you're going to see in a given week, let's say, that are more important instead of, let's call it, less important. Well, for those, you're going to prep, whether it's a stop-in meeting that you're planning, whether it's a presentation to your team who knows you well, or a conference presentation for 500 people, you're going to prep. So I'm going to turn it back to Laura and say, what do you think for the average person out there in professional life? What does that mean to prepare correctly?
The number one thing that I say to anxious performers or anxious presenters in particular, but you don't even have to be anxious. You can be extremely calm and collected. And this is the first thing that you do is you research that audience that you're going to be in front of. Find out everything you can about them. And I even have that. I think it's the number one video in my public speaking foundations course. Find out everything you can about the audience. And this can be a really simple thing to do. I use the example of somebody calls me on the phone, and I don't know if you do this, Todd, but I do too. And they're like, hey, can you come speak for our organization? And I'll say, sure. First question out of my mouth, tell me everything you can about the audience. And they'll give you top of mind insights real quickly. Oh, it's a Midwest manufacturing firm. Everybody there is makes over $5 million in sales per year. Whatever it is, they're telling you, you're getting a big picture, and then you kind of grind down on some of the nitty gritty details. That's my approach. What is your approach, Todd?
It's similar, but I think it's really important that we say when you have an opportunity, again, whether it's a planned stop in or a big conference presentation, you do not want to make assumptions. I'm talking about that 20% again. You don't want to make assumptions. I was booking a gig the other day for a corporate event, and I made an assumption that the audience, long story short, was going to be dominated by males. And I was corrected so quickly when I flippantly said that, and it was explained to me why it's diverse. So that was a faux pas on me, but I was doing it in the service of trying to understand the audience. I always ask about demographics in terms of gender and age and education and the types of positions people. And then I go further. I know you do these things too. And I say, what's life like for them right now? What are they talking about? Is there something in the news? Are people angry about what's the pain point they're actually all talking about at the water cooler right now? Or what are they excited about because it's just on the horizon? And it's surprising when you set it up like that, in fact, how much people will tell you, well, it's good you asked that because, 6 months ago, we had a big layoff, and there's still people talking about that and unsure about that. So you want to be aware of that and steer clear of maybe those types of comments. Or guess what? We're actually planning an M&A with this firm, and everyone's thrilled about it, or whatever it might be. You want to know these things, so in a tiny way, you can shape what you do to show that you have a meaningful understanding of who they are and what they're going through.
I quite agree. I'm going to go to the comments
Hmm.
and see what people are saying. Neil here
Neil
says,
says, talk slower. That's as silly as telling me to grow hair, Neil.
Neil, okay, so you're getting a heckler, but actually Neil does take an aspirin to calm down. And right before we hopped into this live event, Todd and I were talking about how each of us are getting older, and somehow standing on stage sometimes for long periods of time, it's like, a part of me is like, man, I need to sit down after a bit. I'm getting older here. So we don't know whether are we getting older, or is it COVID times that are making us a little bit more exhausted on stage. But I have probably taken an aspirin or two in my time before a presentation as well, not to calm down, but more of a preemptive, so that my knees don't start hurting halfway through. That it is something. I actually worked with an executive. We had a one-on-one consult, and she said, I don't know what's wrong with me. I always used to be okay, but now I'm getting jittery and nervous, and you need to help me. And before I did anything with her, I said, when was the last time you had a physical checkup? And she says, oh, I haven't gone because COVID. I don't want to go into the doctor and everything. I'm like, well, before we start doing things, I'd really feel good about it if you went and did that. Turned out she had high blood pressure. She got some medication for it. And wouldn't you know it, all those jitters that she had really calmed down. And we did a few sessions anyway, but I suspect the doctor did more help than I did, to be frank. But if you find yourself in a situation like that, yeah, sometimes taking some medical advice is not the worst thing to do.
You may have tapped into something really interesting there, Laura, because why do people tell others, hey, just be yourself? Probably one of the drivers, the biggest driver maybe, is, well, they're nervous and they've expressed some version of, I got the jitters, I'm nervous, I'm anxious. Well, you might need a doctor, like your example. But I'd love to tell people, just to put them at ease, listen, we all have nerves. I've been on stage live as a pro for over 20 years. I still have nerves. You, if you're smart and diligent, will learn to manage them, to make them not a problem, even if they're still present in some way. In fact, you can learn to use them and channel them, but they never fully go away. You're learning to exist with them without that being a problem. That's one long way of saying the more you do this and thoughtfully attempt to improve at it, the more you gain comfort in that situation that used to freak you out, but now just kind of energizes you in a better way. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. I tell my younger students, as a matter of fact, that nerves are the respect you pay your audience. And someone just asked me in a podcast last week, do you get nervous before a presentation? You seem so calm. And I said, I always get nervous before a presentation. And a lot of times the way that manifests itself for me is I get the shaky legs. I even posted a little thing the other day about, I'm like a pony, right? A racehorse before a race. I'm all, let's go. And the legs are shaking and I'm raring to go. And then I hit my stride and I'm like, oh, suddenly the legs stop doing their little twitchy thing.
I'll share. I'm sorry. I apologize. I'll share how I deal with it, if you'll share how you tend to deal with it before you go on stage. I've evolved a process that starts with, yeah, I know this is anxious. This is people are gonna be watching you. You gotta do this. So you acknowledge that. That's why you're gonna have your little pregame routine. Or for me, very often that involves music. I like upbeat rock and roll, usually right here, so no one can hear. This only takes 3, 4, 5 minutes. And I use that because music touches us emotionally, at least does me. I use that to really actively envision, eyes closed. I'm off in a corner. Nobody sees me. Eyes closed, envisioning what I'm about to do. I'm huge on this. sports people, theater people, many people have been huge on the proper use of imagination and seeing that movie in your head of what you're about to do and how you're going to kill it. So on the one hand, you're rehearsing and prepping in the classic sense. On the other hand, you're visualizing, very important, what success looks like. I got the rock and roll visual success right there. I can see it. Okay, let's go. I do that for about 5 minutes and it helps me calm down and focus. And that works for me. What do you do?
I like to tell students, and I do it for myself personally, that what works for Todd may not work for someone else.
Sure.
That what you do to manage your nerves is your own little bespoke cocktail. And here's another thing, as you age, the things that used to work for you may not work for you anymore. So it is a constant voyage of self-discovery. For example, power posing, that completely works for me. And power posing is where you adopt a broad pose before you get on stage, where you might, throw your hands up over your head in a victor's pose so that you feel that energy, or, stand with your hands on your hips like Wonder Woman. Some people get really freaked out by that, and it doesn't work for them at all. Other people need to do things like box breathing or 3-4-7 breathing to calm down their anxiety. That never worked for me. Boy, is that working really well for me right now.
No kidding.
Yeah, it is. So prime yourself to say, this is a constant journey of self-discovery. Try these new techniques to calm yourself down or to ramp yourself up, whatever you might happen to need. And I see we're getting comments flying in. So let's see what a few of them are. One thing that I've learned is that most people in the audience want you to succeed. They are on your side. So that thought plus preparation is a good combo. Agree.
So I definitely agree. I think that people underestimate how much. Now, every audience is different, of course, but generally speaking, people in an audience want you to not make a big embarrassing blunder. They want to see some value, maybe even feel enlivened or entertained, but they don't want to see, I believe this is true. Now, you tell me, because the modern generation of young people, starting with millennials and going into Z's, they do love fail videos. You ever seen fail videos where someone slips and we all laugh, or whatever the fail might be? So I'm hopeful that audiences never adopt that mentality, or I would be very fearful. But my experience has been that they know what it feels like to stand up in front of an audience and try and convey a message successfully. And that's why, forevermore, hopefully, audiences aren't looking for you to fail. They might see imperfections, things they don't agree with, but they are not rooting for you to fail. That is really the exception. The norm is they want you to be very successful, and they're going to feel almost relieved when you successfully wrap it up. That actually happens. I've seen people do it.
Mistakes happen on stage all the time, and business audiences are largely empathetic to mistakes. Sometimes they go by completely unnoticed. I had someone ask me a month ago or so, what do you do if you make a really big mistake on stage? And I said, make it twice. That way it'll look like you planned it the whole time.
Yeah.
And that might be a bit funny or a joke, but I've had things go terribly wrong on stage. I had a tornado alarm go off at one point. Not a whole lot you can do when that happens other than ask the audience, how would you like to proceed? And they said, we want to call our friends and family, make sure they're all okay. And then we need to head into the basement. And I continued the presentation in the basement. So things happen all the time. You don't know what's going to happen, but the audience, no matter what, if you think things have failed so badly, there's no way you can recover from it, the audience will usually help you out.
And once again, strangely enough, I love sharing this with people. When you make an error, or at least you perceive some type of error that's taken place, you're actually, oddly, unexpectedly affirming the humanity in others, because they are aware, more so than they'll ever talk about or admit to others outside of one close friend. They know they're imperfect too. And so when they see you do it and you, let's call it, decently recover, you don't freak out. That's the first thing you tell someone about mistakes, is you don't go, oh my God, I'm so sorry. You actually just want to move on as if it didn't happen, or make it into something that makes you stronger, the way Laura was saying. Well, again, we're all different. What works for me is usually in my head, split second, no one notices. I know it happened. I know how to fix it. I fix it with words moving in another productive direction, and almost no one even knows I made an error or said something silly, because I moved on and they're still engaged in what I'm talking about. But those who did notice, they go, oh, good. I like this guy. He's human. He's not too hidey-tidy and full of himself. He makes errors just like I do.
And I know Izzy isn't here because, the illness, but improv, when we are in the audience watching improv and improv sketches, part of the joy of it is watching the struggle, right? It is interesting because you know that what is happening is being created right in the moment, sort of like what Todd and I are doing right now. We're creating this right in the moment. Anything could happen. People could ask a question that you don't know what to deal with. A tech issue could happen. Anything could happen. Part of the joy of the live event is watching the struggle, watching to see what is going to happen. And there's a certain joy in that, to know that in that live event, anything could happen. It's not going to be edited. It is going to be real. It's going to be raw. It's going to be authentic. And people really seem to want more of that.
It's funny because I think you're correct. And yet, when I just think about giving presentations to audiences, one thing I've learned over time is that not all pros, not all professionals in general, I'm not talking about professional speakers, just professionals, they don't enjoy Q&A nearly as much as they could imagine many other things they'd rather do. I love Q&A. It's unscripted. You're just thinking and speaking extemporaneously. It's improv. And I enjoy that, because you don't talk about being yourself, which was our original topic. Well, whether you like it or not, more of the real you is about to come out, because you are intentionally off script, trying to deal with things that they have just asked you that you didn't prepare for at all. I love doing that. I don't know why. So I always offer it to clients, and always enjoy it. And sometimes audiences enjoy it more than an even really good talk, because it's more real and, of course, more applied. And that's the version of being yourself I enjoy most when I get on stage, is knowing there's going to be a personal conversation after.
I 100% agree. The Q&A part of a presentation is usually my very favorite part of the presentation.
Yeah.
Sometimes I think the only reason I give a presentation or give a speech is so that we can have a framework for people to ask the questions afterwards, right? I love doing that. And that's part of the spontaneity. And Todd, I know you teach a class. I think the class is only about 20 or 25 minutes. It's on LinkedIn Learning. It's free to LinkedIn Premium members. It's called Impromptu Public Speaking. And that really helps you handle situations like a Q&A. So if it's a Q&A, you don't want to go to somebody who's really nervous and say, just be yourself. What they need is a framework for how to reply to any question in a minute or less.
Absolutely.
And Todd uses the framework that I call bluff, or bottom line up front, where if somebody asks you a question, and I use this in media training myself or impromptu training for people, is bottom line up front is you state the bottom line up front. Somebody asks you a question, you give them the answer to it, back it up with 2 examples, and give a close. Boom. It is pretty much the paper that you wrote in high school. Remember, you wrote your thesis paragraph, you gave a few examples, and then you did a close. Same thing. So many executives, they're going to be themselves. So they're like, when I was a child, I'm like, oh, no. You're going down a road, and we're not going there. We're going to answer that question in the board meeting, and we're going to answer it directly and then support it with a few points and close. There are other methods. There's the STAR method. There's, bottom line up front. There's a lot of different ways to do an impromptu. And we practice those so that when you are in the moment, the format is in your head. You are answering the format. You kind of see it in your head about how you're going to respond to it. And that's not you being you. That's you being a trained you, so that you can be your best self in a Q&A session.
It's interesting that, so we're saying, don't just be yourself. It's not good advice. On the other hand, people aren't trained to be actors. They're not spectacular actors. So how much different than the normal them, the conversational with a good friend them, should they, how much can they deviate from that before it looks strange to others? Have you ever seen someone with good intentions attempt to act like a professional, and all of a sudden a version of them you've never seen before uses words they can barely pronounce? You know what I mean? How do you tell someone because they think it's appropriate? It's an executive audience. They must know that I'm smart and I understand these things. So how do you tell someone, if you were coaching them, you actually need to reel it in and try to not just meet their needs, because meeting their needs sometimes pushes you into a space where you're not comfortable speaking that way at all. So there's got to be a happy medium. You know what I mean?
This is the value of having a coach, because I will often see people do things and internally I'm going, ooh, that's a tough messaging. Oh, but I'm not their coach. It's not my job. I am not interfering in this. But when someone calls me and says, I think I have a problem, then we review it. And now I can give the honest feedback on that.
Mm.
I think a lot of bosses mean well. They'll pull somebody aside and say, you need to present better. And that's it. You know, don't say that word. And that's it. And that's why the whole be yourself doesn't work really well in that circumstance. At that point, it's more, I'm telling you to be yourself out of frustration because I don't know how to help you.
Hmm.
And like a lot of be your best self advice is well intentioned, but some of it is just basically it's out there as frustration. So learning techniques like what Todd is teaching of the bottom line up front, or a problem solution is another impromptu framework. We start drilling those. So when people go on tangents or they go off road, as a coach, I can bring them back and say, well, let's take a look at your format and how we're going to answer that more appropriately and more succinctly.
You just said something really interesting when you mentioned the bad feedback people sometimes receive. Maybe well-intentioned, but not terribly useful. It really does raise a question when you think about what does it mean to be yourself and how you should or should not do that. Here's a contention, an idea. Most people, even good professionals out there who present a modest amount on a regular basis, aren't meaningfully aware of how they're being perceived. So they don't have good data to even try to ask whether or not they're meeting the audience's needs, or they're acting too much like themselves and it's casual and not effective, whatever the case may be. So what do you say to them when you're starting a coaching relationship about that perception problem that I allege is a big deal and a place you have to start? What do you do about that?
I like to start from a place of strength. When I start a coaching client, I will have them talk to me just for a few minutes, and I'll ask them a classic question like, what brought you here to me? And I'll listen to them talk. I'll listen to them introduce themselves, and I will note what their strengths are. It is a whole lot easier to coach somebody when you look at their strengths and start building on that. That way, when you start chipping away at the things that they aren't doing as well, they're more receptive to it. And I do find that a lot of managers and bosses start criticizing almost instantly before working on what those strengths are and building on them. So that's a thing. Coaching, especially public speaking, can be a little tricky because it's both a skill set and a mindset.
Sure.
And you don't want to destroy somebody's mindset before you build those skill set pieces.
Totally agree. I think what I was trying to get at is, so how do you tell a client? Well, I'll ask people. I used to do this to students. I still do it to clients now. How do you think you are being perceived typically? Or on that presentation, how do you feel you were received? Or what do you think they thought about that? And always, because humans are not good at seeing how we're seen, there's a perception gap. The only question is whether it's big or small. So sometimes I feel the need to tell someone, you come off as intelligent and meek and quiet, and whether you understand it or not, that can have implications for how people feel about you. And another person might need to hear, you are loud and confident, and I'm not sure I completely understand why. And this audience is going to be, well, maybe taken aback a little bit by that level of energy and confidence. Whatever they need to hear to move them to a place that's more centered and audience appropriate is fun to share. It's difficult too. You know that better than I do. It's difficult, but it's important. I just wanted to share with everyone. I don't think most people really understand the answer to that question. Hey, how do people typically perceive me? And it's really useful to endeavor to find out that answer.
You're touching on the work by social researchers Savitsky and Gilovich, and they talk about the illusion of transparency and the perception gap of what you think you are and what the audience thinks you are two different things, completely different. It's really interesting and fascinating research, which is once again why having a coach can be really important, because they can help you see that perception gap of what you have and how the audience perceives you a little more closely. Todd, that was one fast half hour. And let's turn to the audience and see what's going on. Where are Todd and Laura located? Neil's in New York. And where are you located, Todd?
I'm Houston, Texas.
I am Grand Rapids, Michigan, or I should say beautiful Grand Rapids, Michigan. Thank you for showing up today. And I think we can close with a really good comment is, don't just be yourself, be your best self, or as another way to put it, be the self that your dog thinks you are.
I love it.
Thanks for joining me today, Todd, and looking forward to talking with you next time. Let's see the balloons. Can we get the balloons? Yes. Balloons means show is over. Sayonara.